Hey, this is Art from My New Microphone, and today I would like to discuss an effective yet super simple habit to develop to help us get better mixes more consistently. The habit is very easy to implement. All it takes is a pad and a pen or some other note-taking app, whether analog or digital. Yes, I'm talking about the importance of note-taking. All right, that's it. I will see you in the next one. No, but seriously, I would encourage you to stick around as I go through the important things worth noting throughout the entirety of the mix, starting with mix preparation and going all the way to mix finalization. So let's start at the very beginning of the mix and where we can start taking notes to help us better understand what we are working with. And that first step comes once we get our first impression of the mix in our mix session, whether we are mixing our own music or the music of others. So once we have the mix session, we should have everything at unity. Maybe we did a little bit of gain staging, but we should listen through the initial mix before we start pushing faders or anything else and take down a few of the following notes. Take note of any timing or tuning issues that must be fixed in the mix. Now, we may want things to be tighter or looser depending on the genre or style of music and the song itself, but taking down any notes that are glaringly obvious or worth addressing in the future is important when it comes to timing and tuning. Another strategy worth implementing is actually zooming in on the waveforms themselves and checking out the phase relationships between different tracks in the mix. I actually did a video on this subject, and I will link it in the description box below. If there are significant phase issues, we may want to address them immediately. Otherwise, we can take notes of any phase issues that need addressing between different instruments, especially when these instruments have strong transient information or a lot of low-end information that can often really suffer from any poor phase relationships within the mix. Another note worth taking as we are getting familiar with the mixing session, as we listen through the song a few times, is to draw out the long-term dynamics of the song. Draw out the points of low energy versus the points of high energy and have a sort of curve going throughout the entirety of the song, signifying the points of low energy and high energy and all points in between. Having a curve or map of the long-term dynamics of the song will be invaluable as we get into the mixing stages to find the points of high energy and mix accordingly, and the points of low energy where we can also mix accordingly. It's also important before diving into the initial mix to take notes on the hierarchy of elements. That is to list out all of the different tracks and elements within the mix in order of highest importance all the way down to lowest importance. This will help tremendously in making more objective decisions throughout the mix because we'll have a list to rely on telling us what is most important and what is less important so we can mix accordingly. Moving on now to the initial mix of the song with faders and pan pots. We should be taking notes of any potential frequency masking or other issues between certain tracks as we are pushing faders in the mix. Taking notes on frequency masking at this point will help us in the future when it comes time to use EQ to solve these issues. Also, with our hierarchy of elements, when it does come time to deal with this frequency masking in the future, we will know which track should have preferential treatment with EQ over the others. During the initial mix, we should also take note of any tracks that are overly dynamic and which would really benefit from compression in the future. Now, as we advance through the mix and start using processors and really get toward finalizing the mix, it's important to take regular breaks to kind of refresh our ears and reset our objectivity. Upon arriving back to our mix session after our break, it can be beneficial to listen through the song from start to finish and take any notes on issues that may have been missed in the previous mixing session. Once we have completed our mix, it's important to bounce it out and to reference it outside the studio in different playback systems and listening environments to hear how it sounds across as many different systems as possible. It's one thing to get a great mix on good studio monitors in an acoustically treated room or on nice studio headphones, but it's another thing to get a mix that translates really well to different playback systems and listening environments. And so it's crucial that we take our mix out of the studio before really finalizing it and listen to it in as many different places as possible, and also to take notes about what could be improved as we listen through in these different environments. A few things we should consider taking notes on as we reference our mix outside the studio are whether certain tracks need to come up or down in the mix, whether the mix is too bright or too dark, especially relative to any reference mixes we are referencing our mix against. Any resonances that we may have missed in the mix, although it's important to make sure that these resonances aren't actually in the systems we're listening to or in the environments that we're listening to the mix in. How the low end stacks up especially if you don't have a subwoofer in the studio and you do have a subwoofer in these other listening environments. Listening in systems that can actually produce these very low-end frequencies can give us a better sense of how our low end is matching up in the mix. Oftentimes it's best to get rid of low end energy if we can't actually hear it in the studio, but that's just another reason why referencing outside the studio is a critical step before finalizing a mix. So take particular notes on how the low end sounds in all of the different listening environments you take your mix into. And a fifth note worth considering is how the stereo balance actually stands up in the mix as we reference it outside the studio. Is the mix too wide and the phase issues between the left and right channels really cause issues when we're referencing in other systems, particularly in mono? Or do we get a realistic sense of a stereo spectrum in all of the different systems that we are listening to that aren't in mono? As an aside, I would also like to mention a few different ways to switch up the monitoring inside our studio, even if we only have a single pair of studio monitors or a single pair of headphones, as a way to reference our mix in different ways while we're in the mix so that we can make mixing decisions on the spot versus taking notes and then having to go through and fix them in the mix at a later time. So a few easy ways to switch up the monitoring in our studio is to switch the mix bus between stereo and mono playback. We can monitor with a bandpass filter on the mix bus to filter out the low end and high end frequencies and really focus our attention on the mid range. This can help with mix translatability to more consumer grade systems that have very poor low end and high end response, but still do a relatively good job of reproducing the mid range in a pretty accurate way. If we happen to only have a single pair of studio monitors or studio headphones, as a lot of home studios do, we can opt to listen straight out of the computer's built-in speakers or invest in a cheap pair of computer speakers to get a better sense of how our mix will sound through consumer grade sources. And perhaps the simplest way to switch up our monitoring while we are inside the mix session is to monitor at different levels. We actually hear sound differently at different levels, and the louder we turn up our monitoring during the mix, the more flat our hearing response will be between the human audible range of 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. And as we turn down our monitoring, our ears will lose the ability to really hear in the very low end or the very high end, which will focus our efforts more so on the mid-range. So with that bonus information out of the way, if you will, I would like to thank you for being here. I hope you've been taking notes on this video about taking notes, as meta as that sounds, and that you've learned the importance of taking notes and have a better strategy of note-taking in the future to help you with your mixes. For years, I was mixing in the dark, kind of chasing my tail, and it wasn't until I really started taking detailed notes and focusing my efforts that I could get the mixes that I was happy with in less time and with less ultimate effort. If you liked this video and found it informative, I would invite you to hit that like button down below, subscribe for more content on the My New Microphone YouTube channel. We are just getting started, and I'm glad to have you here with me. In this end screen, I will show another few videos that I think will greatly benefit you in your mixing endeavors. So click on one of these next, and I will see you in the next video.